Welcome to Charter California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance. You know him well. His name is Sam Blakeslee. He served in the California State Assembly and the California State Senate from 2004 to 2012, 6 years in the Assembly, about 3 years in the Senate. He is now the founding director of the Institute for Advanced Technology and Public Policy at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Congratulations, Mr. Founding Director.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. Good to see you again.
You bet. Tell us about the Institute.
Well, you know, I left the legislature almost exactly 1 year ago.
Right.
And it gave me an
opportunity. Of your own volition, by the way.
That's correct. I elected to not run in that race.
Right.
And decided to instead invest my time in this proposition that we need better ideas for public policy. And that most of the bills we voted on routinely were really poorly crafted in Sacramento.
And voted on with
sometimes in the dead of night, with very little analysis.
No vetting.
A lot of bills were, in fact, written by special interests that were fighting against each other. And what I found frustrating.
And if I may interrupt, you were in the room, especially in 2009, 2010,
yes,
because you were minority leader of the Assembly. So you really had a bird's eye view. I mean, it was the big four back then. It was minority, majority, and then the governor.
Well, you bring up a really good point.
Right.
You know, I started as a backbencher.
Right.
And worked through the system, effectively moving to the top of the respective org chart.
Right.
In an effort to try and drive change and create real reform and make Sacramento work. And notwithstanding every effort I made,
yes,
I continually found myself working in a highly dysfunctional system. In large part because even at those critical moments where people were willing to compromise,
right,
the hard work to create good policies around which you could say yes to had not happened. And so time and again you saw these grand compromises come forward, and then they would say yes to really shoddy product, to bills and initiatives and proposals that were not well vetted, and solutions which, even if the voters were to implement them, would not have worked.
And it was such a tough time back then. I mean, 2009, 2010, it was just ground zero of the economic meltdown. And so
yes,
the choices were far and few between.
There were no good answers, or
exactly,
no pain-free answers. There was no, well, let's just start universal health care.
Right, exactly.
Universal daycare.
Pre-K.
Let's just spend another $10 billion on our favorite whatever project. It was, where do you make the tough cuts? And how do you radically restructure government so it actually works and performs? So the notion is that with this institute, we want to create those ideas so that when those moments of opportunity present themselves, there are really strong, thoughtful, viable policy solutions that could actually be implemented and would work.
So the title of the institute is Institute for Advanced Technology and Public Policy. You're saying something.
Advanced Technology and Public Policy speaks to this, I think, very fundamental fact that we're operating in a world that's changing very rapidly.
Oh my.
You can look abroad, you look at overseas, you look at the phone in your pocket. Everything is changing. The last place where change is admitted is in government.
This is an anecdote, and I must say it to you. So all my segments, all our segments, we get YouTube links.
Yeah.
I send them off to the staffs of the various members. I put them on my Twitter feed, my Facebook. Maybe 1 or 2% get retweeted or shared on Facebook. I don't mind that, but I would think the members would want the free press.
There's enormous inertia,
right,
and people are naturally very resistant to new ideas and new ways of doing things. That's true for something as simple as tweeting a link, but it's doubly true for how do you make government smarter and faster and more efficient. If you think that's true for one person, imagine a body of 120 people and state agencies that are highly resistant to change.
We think about technology and how healthcare.gov didn't go so well.
A classic example.
Yes, how Covered California went better, but has had its challenges.
That's right.
How the Oregon healthcare website never has gone up. And so when we come back, sir, I want to continue our conversation, hear more about some of your ideas. We're speaking with Sam Blakeslee. He is now the founding director of the Institute for Advanced Technology and Public Policy. For our viewers on HLN, thank you for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back. So, sir, I'm sure you have some very specific ideas about what you'd like to do to marry technology and public policy. Begin.
I will. First, I'd like to point out that the Institute is strictly nonpartisan.
Okay.
And that's important because although I am a Republican and a proud Republican, I leave my party registration at the door when I face public policy questions.
What's interesting about you, if I may say, is you are a Republican and you were the minority leader in the Assembly, but you have been attacked on both sides for being a crazy conservative Republican and a rhino, a Republican in name only. So maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that says a lot about you and that you get attacked from both sides.
I don't know if it says something about me or it says something about the political environment in which we're operating. My background is as a research scientist, so I take a very, I think, real-world, pragmatic, how do you solve problem approach as opposed to a strictly ideological approach when I engage public policy.
But I do think that having been attacked by both sides probably gives you a bit of credibility when you say this is nonpartisan.
It is nonpartisan. I would agree. And one of the things I've done to try and demonstrate that it's nonpartisan is the board we've pulled together is strictly nonpartisan. So we have people like Charles Ungar, who's a very active Republican, who supported and actually helped pass the redistricting reforms and the nonpartisan primary reforms that have helped, I think, change the landscape in California.
It has.
But also Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom, who's a friend of mine, has joined my board.
A Democrat, of course.
A Democrat.
Former mayor of San Francisco.
That's right. So we've got a dozen board members who, in fact, exist across the ideological spectrum, but all the members of our board are known for being innovative and people who will drive reform.
Mr. Newsom, I mean, he really is pushing the social media envelope. He had a television show himself as a sitting member in the Lieutenant Governor's office. I mean, he's pushing it. There is no doubt.
Absolutely. And that's the caliber of person we're looking for, notwithstanding a person's party affiliation. Are you a big thinker? Are you willing to embrace change? Are you willing to do things differently?
So we talked about the failings of healthcare.gov.
Yes.
About the challenges of Cover California, which actually hasn't been so bad. It's done pretty well. But Oregon, disaster. I mean, they haven't even launched. So what can you tell us about technology and how you want to marry technology and public policy?
Well, I'll give you an example of one of the projects that we just got funded last month. The Department of Energy has funded a research proposal we put forward, which was to create a national offshore wave energy test facility. A national offshore wave energy
I know you're a geophysicist.
Facility.
Is that your title?
That's correct.
Okay.
So here's the challenge.
Okay.
We've seen how solar energy started as a kind of a crazy idea that they put up on satellites. It was a very expensive way to generate electricity. And over the years and decades, and now over this last development cycle, we've seen the cost of solar plummet. In fact,
in a good way.
In a good way.
Right.
It's getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. Now it's applied all over. And in fact, the cost of solar has come down to the point where it's very competitive with other technologies. The same thing is true with wind turbines. We're starting to see the same thing with fuel cells. One particular area where we have not seen that advancement yet is in wave energy, which is the ability to convert the motion of the waves offshore into electrical generation.
Got it.
The Obama administration would like to believes that one of the impediments to that technology moving forward is there's no place where those types of equipment can be tested in a real deep water marine environment. So for the most part, when someone has a great idea on how to convert wave motions and energy, it's done through numerical simulation. They run algorithms on their computer. They set up a little wave tank in their lab, or maybe they get out in the bay and try something. But what we need, if we're really going to fast track that type of technology, is a high quality place in deep water, high seas, tough environments, so that folks, commercial developers, can bring different types of wave energy systems.
Where are you going to do this?
The grant that we received is to do a feasibility study, $750,000 of research to look at two locations. One in the Humboldt area, Northern California. The other is off the Santa Barbara coast, more in the Vandenberg area.
The reason I ask is, and again, I'm not a scientist, but I'm sure you remember when there was a desire to do some offshore testing with Diablo Canyon that essentially got shot down because of concerns of its impact on wildlife. I presume that this would not impact that in such a way.
Yeah, this is a very small footprint. It's a floating lab as opposed to a large marine offshore energy generation system, which could be many square miles in extent.
I understand.
And we're actually looking very seriously at looking at trade-off research for that type of work. But the work for which we've been funded first is to look at whether or not California would be the right place for a national test facility. Oregon and Washington are also looking at whether or not they would be the ideal location.
You'll come back?
Absolutely.
His name is Sam Blakeslee. He is now the founding director of the Institute for Advanced Technology and Public Policy at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. When we come back, we'll be speaking with two members of the San Luis Coastal School District. I'm Brad Pomerance. It's Charter California Edition.
How many Republicans currently serve in the California State Senate? 10, 11, 12, or 13? 11 members of the Republican Party currently serve in the California State Senate. The number dropped from 12 when Bill Emerson resigned from the body.
Welcome back. It's Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are joined by Chris Ungar. He is a trustee at the San Luis Coastal Unified School District, but he is now the vice president of the California School Boards Association. Congratulations.
Thank you, Brad.
I'm very happy for you, very proud of you. You were elected in December of 2013 for the entire state.
For the entire state.
How did that happen?
You know, it's been something I've wanted to do for a long time.
It is. You've talked to me about it.
And you and I have talked about it. I'm in the fortunate position of being able to retire this year.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes. And so, because
retire your day job.
Retire my day job.
Not your trustee job.
Not my trustee job, no. And because I knew that I'd have more time to do it, and it was something that I'd wanted to do for a long time. It was just kind of a nice convergence. I was lucky nobody else decided to run against me.
You ran unopposed, that helps.
I ran unopposed, and
right.
that was really nice.
Right.
You know, it made me feel good that.
But you had to go through a committee, though.
Absolutely,
right.
I had to go through a pretty extensive committee, answering some in-depth questions about where do I think the California School Boards Association should be this year, what's the state of education in California, right. and about my experiences.
And I have been asking you the same question month after month, and that question has been, we know that Common Core has arrived. Yes. And Common Core completely changes the way students are educated. Instead of focusing on rote memorization, Common Core looks to create analytical thinkers, critical thinkers. Okay, that's fine. Great idea. Changing standardized tests to avoid the rote memorization towards adaptive testing to encourage that critical thinking. Wonderful, but wait a second. There's something called the SAT. The SAT is the epitome of a standardized test that focuses upon rote memorization. And I keep saying to you, what is happening with the SAT? I've heard nothing about whether they're going to adapt to Common Core, which has been adopted by 45 states. Miracle of miracles, you've gotten a response from the College Board.
I did, and we can talk about that, because remember the last time I talked to you, I promised you that I'd bring back some information on it, and so I had to do some digging. So the first thing was I met someone who represents the College Board at our annual school board conference and was given some places to look at. I tried to get in touch.
No response.
It was difficult to get a response from them. I finally got a response from them today, and I'll share the response that I got.
Please.
But I think first let's talk about something interesting about the College Board, which I didn't realize until I started doing a little bit of research. And that is the new president of the College Board, a man named David Coleman, I believe from Columbia University, helped write the Common Core standards.
Okay.
And so there's a positive thing right there. So
arguably, he would take his knowledge of Common Core and bring it to a new SAT.
Exactly. The information I've gotten is that the College Board, the SAT folks, are working to revise the SAT to reflect the Common Core, which only makes sense since the Common Core, as we know, was developed in order to make sure that kids are college and job ready. So
and I want to hear the statement in a moment,
absolutely.
But it makes sense that they're looking to revise it.
Right.
You say they want a new version, or they have told you that they are going to put out a new version
15, 16.
Okay, so that's fine, but that means that kids that have been educated under Common Core for 1, maybe 2 years are going to be taking a new test.
Yeah, and
they may not be ready for this new critical thinking, non-rote memorization type of test.
It is going to be a challenge, just like it's a challenge to think about the standardized testing in California.
Okay, if you want to hear,
we'll get to that.
If you want to hear the SAT College Board's response, you'll have to tune into the California channel, because for our viewers on HLN, we thank you so much for joining us. For our other viewers on the California channel, we'll be right back with Chris Ungar. I'm Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back. So, Chris, let's hear the response from the College Board as to whether they're going to adapt to Common Core.
So this is the answer that they gave me. This is from Carly Lindauer, their Senior Director of External Communications. The revised assessment system was developed with the same evidence-based research that informed the development of the Common Core standards and other rigorous state standards. The SAT and the PSAT and the NMSQT are being revised in partnership with teachers from every major discipline, and the content of the exams will reflect what students learn in the classroom. Every improvement to the revised exams will reflect rigorous research around college and career readiness and will represent a dedication to the academic standards that are clearer, fewer, and higher. So, to me, this is
it sounds like one big alphabet soup.
It does
like one big alphabet soup.
So maybe that's one of the things when you take the SAT is
right.
They're going to have this new section where you define acronyms
exactly.
or something like that. But it sounds to me like they've bought into it. And one of the reasons, like I said, is apparently is this new president of the College Board. Now, interestingly enough, another thing that I read was the SAT has competition. It's called the ACT.
Yes, that is true.
And
I have a nephew who's opting for the ACT.
Mm-hmm. My son took the ACT. My son
for our viewers who may not understand or know the differences, what are the differences?
You know,
as you understand it.
My understanding is that the SAT is more of almost an aptitude kind of a test. It has a reading portion, a math portion, a writing portion, a logic portion, I believe.
Right.
The understanding I have about the ACT is that it's more grounded in the curriculum.
And there's science, I believe, on it?
I don't know.
Yeah, I thought there may have been some science on it as well.
I know, though, that I believe what I read was, although more kids are taking the SAT for the first time was surpassed by the ACT and testing. So there's clearly competition between the two.
Well, I hate to do this to you, but are you going to contact the ACT board and see if they're getting ready for Common Core?
Well, you know, and that's something I can certainly do. Right. Next time I come over, I'll talk about it.
Because I wonder what they are doing. See, the SAT had been very popular on the West Coast and the East Coast. The ACT was very popular in the Midwest and the South. But now what we're suggesting is that it's now becoming more of a national test. So maybe I have been negligent in not asking people about the ACT. Because is the ACT also needing a tune-up with Common Core?
And I don't know, but that's certainly something I can find out about. And the next time I come on, I'll get you that information. So
because I have to tell you, I mean, I have personal experience with these standardized tests through my children, and my children have been educated in one form of philosophy that is not towards standardized tests. And so when they've been required to take a standardized test, it's been a real uphill battle because it's not something that they have been trained or taught to do. And that's why I'm so very concerned about the SAT, because I don't care what anyone says, it is an ultimate exam.
The SAT or the ACT.
I mean, I've spoken with admissions officers, and while SAT and ACT scores may not be qualifying, they're disqualifying. They're disqualifying.
And I guess that gets to another question that you and I have talked about. Are these tests, and is there any way of giving a test like that kind of a test? Does it test the, this is, gosh darn it, Brad, this is the exact stuff we're talking about. Does it test what we expect kids to know?
I believe.
And do we want to test, do we want to be teaching kids to fill in those bubbles?
I have to tell you,
does that make you a smarter person?
I believe in the depth of my core that the modern current standardized test absolutely is not a gauge. It really, I mean, I've looked at some of these tests. It's a lot of, it really depends on what you were taught. I mean, you don't know what you don't know. And if there's a vocabulary word that you don't know, it doesn't mean you're not smart. It means you don't know it. If there's a problem that's on the test that you don't know how to do, it's not because you're not smart. You may not have been taught how to do it.
Well, exactly. And I don't know if I can digress for a minute and tell you a story about when I took the GRE, because I took the GRE.
Which is a graduate school exam.
Which is the graduate sort of
version of SAT.
Exactly. So I was going to take the GRE, and I took a little GRE class with a friend of mine.
Right.
So we got to the vocabulary section. We had this box of vocabulary words. We were memorizing vocabulary words. And so, as a joke, because and I think this says a lot, we wrote vocabulary words up and down our arms and went to a party. And so our job was to try to weave these words, which you'd never use. Pusillanimous? Come on, hirsute? I mean,
When we come back, we're going to be speaking with Mark Buchman. He's a trustee also on the St. Louis Coastal Unified School District. I'm Brad Pomerance. It's Charter California Edition.
What percentage of the California class of 2013 took the SAT exam? 38%, 46%, 57%, or 64%? 57% of California's 2013 graduating seniors, or 234,767 students, took the SAT exam, a state record.
Welcome back. It's Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest, Mark Buchman, also a trustee with the San Luis Coastal Unified School District. We just spoke with your colleague, Chris Ungar, about kids graduating from high school and taking the SAT, ACT. I want to talk about kids on the other end, those that are about to enter kindergarten.
Right.
We know that President Obama last year talked about his desire to see universal pre-K for 4-year-olds. Recently, the leaders of the state Senate, the state assembly in Sacramento, announced their proposal to create universal pre-K. What's your sense of what's coming out of Sacramento?
I think this is great. It goes right along with us putting in the reduced class sizes, and I think that when we can get the kids into school as quickly as possible, when they're ready to learn, it's a great opportunity. However,
yes, sir.
I would have to make one amendment to this.
Okay.
If I could raise my hand
Please.
from the floor of the legislature, would be, this is great, but this is $1 billion in ongoing costs.
And that's what the cost apparently is. It's about $1 billion of new costs to the state general fund every year.
Right. And so my only amendment would be is pay off everything that you've cut before you spend another $1 billion, because paying off what you cut, a lot of that's just one-time money.
So let's talk about that. We know that over the last 5 years, actually 5 years before this past year, K-12 saw draconian cuts. We know, though, that Prop 30 passed. We know that the economy is improving. We know that the state is facing a surplus. We also know Governor Brown is dedicating much of the new monies to K-12. His goal is to refund, fund everything to pre-recession levels. So he hasn't done it yet, but that's the goal. So do you feel like we're heading on the right path, and as a result we can engage in this experiment of universal pre-K?
I think the governor's primary piece of legislation on this, what he would really like to see is this local control funding formula.
Right.
And there's still parts of it that we don't even know as local school districts.
And I want to talk about that, and I do. But I want to go back to this whole notion of, if for argument's sake we do hit pre-recession levels in terms of education funding, should we add an additional $1 billion to the general fund ledger when we don't have a rainy day fund, when our pension costs are still high, when we still have debt, when we still have children that don't have sufficient English language skills, when we still have disadvantaged children that are underperforming?
And my answer is going to be an equivocal maybe. And here's the equivocation is, what we've seen and what we saw prior to this depression was a lot of stuff coming down from Sacramento. You will do this, you will do that, you will do something, and then we saw it just cut one program at a time. Student transportation, adult education, and that's exactly what I fear with this. And so what I would like to see is take Prop 98, which they shredded, put it back together.
Prop 98 requires that 40% of the general fund go to education, K-12.
And make sure that that's going to continue to function. And then start adding programs like this. Let's find out if we actually have the resources to put the public education in California back together where it was.
So what's your sense of where we are with this proposal? The Assembly Democratic proposal would take effect in 2019 for universal pre-K, the Senate 2020. That's, 6 years off.
Yeah.
So, I mean, should we at least pass this legislation now?
Well, this is actually a phase-in. So the 2020 is actually
the complete phase-in.
The complete phase-in. And so as we phase it in, we're committing ourselves to ongoing spending. Now, this is not a new concept. The California State PTA in 2005 called for this. As you said, President Obama called for it, $75 billion.
When we come back, I want to talk about the LCFF, Local Control Funding Formula, which you just mentioned. For our viewers on HLN, I want to thank you so much for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back on Charter California Edition. So let's continue our conversation, sir, and talk about the local control funding formula. As you know, under this formula, those mandates that you mentioned have all but vanished. Sacramento strings have been cut. A lot more control goes to local districts. The concern, though, is that the regulations giving guidance to school districts as to what money can and cannot be spent for these targeted groups, the English language learners and the disadvantaged students, the foster kids.
And the foster kids.
Pretty vague.
Yeah.
So what's your sense on LCFF and where we go from here?
Well, LCFF, personally, I think is a very good model. However, when it was LCFF, which is local control funding formula, I thought it was a way to go. What's happened is State Board of Education at the end of this month is going to be looking at an entirely revamped set of guidelines for LCFF.
So are those guidelines then the strings being reattached?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah. So
don't you think that would cause a revolt? I mean, honestly, I just, the whole concept behind LCFF was cutting the categoricals.
Right.
And if it's just a categorical by a different name, what's the point?
Yeah, and it was cutting the categoricals, and then it was redistributing the money to districts who had the lower socioeconomics, the English language learners, and the foster kids, and that, that was good spending of money. However, what they also said is that local school boards, local districts could determine how that money was infused into the system. Now this latest set of regulations now set 55% can spend it any way they want, 40% can spend it pretty much any way they want. If you have less than 40%, we're going to tell you. So here in San Luis, for example, we'll have to account for every dollar going to this program.
It is interesting because I know there's a lot of flack coming from school districts because apparently Sacramento is requiring verifications that will indicate whether a child falls into one of these three categories. Those verifications need to come from the parents, and the verifications have been very difficult to collect. And so some school districts are fearful that they'll lose huge amounts of money because they just can't get the verifications forwarded by the parents.
So what's happened? So what's happened in this next round that the State Board of Education is looking at is the verifications are now very specific, very, very specific. So free and reduced lunch, whether you qualify for EIA. So now,
and what's interesting, you mentioned free and reduced lunch. I guess those verifications need to come every 4 years, whereas this verification would need to come yearly. And so, I mean, the LCUSD, the largest school district in the state, its superintendent is apoplectic. I mean, he is just on an absolute rampage. As of December 2013, his district had only collected about 40% of the verifications required. And so he is incredibly fearful that because it's just such a bureaucratic burden that they won't be able to get the funding that would be due.
And I can understand that, and that makes perfect sense. However, for districts that before we had this clear-cut definition of what was needed, it was going to be very difficult for the other districts because we really didn't know what was going to make it qualified and what wasn't.
Well, what we do know is if we look at San Luis Coastal, for example, there's no question that you have a certain percentage of students that fall into those three categories, but you are not going to hit that 55% level, which is the concentration grant, which gives you a whole other chunk of money, whereas your neighbor next door, LCMR, will hit. And so if the regulations allow the new money to be spent wherever the school district wants, boy, that can benefit both the targeted kids and the non-targeted kids.
Right.
And so what do you think of that?
Well, I think I have a problem with it because we have a targeted population, but then what do we do with the kids that are high achievers? What do we do with the kids?
And I've mentioned this to you. I mean, a gifted kid could be just as problematic as a kid that has academic challenges. I mean, gifted kids that are bored are out of their minds.
Right. And we've got all the kids that are caught in the middle. I was one of those kids caught in the middle. Wasn't brilliant, wasn't particularly wealthy, whatever. And so what do we do with those kids? So realistically, by giving it to all districts to spend the way they need to and letting them spend it across the board, we would have been able to make every kid reach their full potential.
But we're not there.
Not with the regulations.
And I don't see it changing. Well, I don't know about the regulations, but LCFF is here to stay, at least for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, it is.
It's a dicey situation. I want to thank you so much for joining us. His name is Mark Buchman. He is a member of the San Luis Coastal Unified School District, also a leader in California State PTA Association. My name is Brad Pomerance. Thank you so much for watching Chartered California Edition.